Okay, it's 9:30. So yeah, let's start. We have all of our speakers here. So hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining Stratbase ADR Institute at our event, Managing Food Supply Chains Amidst a Pandemic, a Multi-Stakeholder Perspective. Today, this is part of our virtual town hall discussion series, and we're very happy to have the varying perspectives here to join us today. To officially welcome us to today's virtual town hall discussion, please let me introduce the president of Stratbase ADR Institute, Professor Dean Dumanhit, for his welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Paco. I think you failed to introduce yourself. That's Paco Pagalangan, our executive director in the institute.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Paco. So again, good morning to everyone, speakers, our guests, participants, different stakeholders in agricultural sector, in food industry. Allow me to welcome everyone by sharing our views in our institute. In our Stratbase ADR Institute has focused on tracking change in society these past few years. We have noticed how the world has been shaped by radical, complex, and accelerated change. At times, these are unanticipated, abrupt change that blindsides you. And when the WHO declared, if I remember it right, March 12th of this year, a global pandemic, that is one abrupt change that we know will not only shape this year, but the years to come. And this impact of what we call in our institute the Wuhan virus is not only economic and social, but even political. Political not meaning electoral, but political that goes beyond electoral. And it's about the process by which scarce resources are allocated. And this battle, where do we grow? Agriculture, manufacturing, services, how do we grow each sector, becomes a political question. In Stratbase ADRI, we have tracked trends and challenges, and we have always argued, because we are quite heavy in our partnership with pharmaceutical companies around the world, when they briefed us latter part of April this year, and they spoke of the possibility, the earliest possibility of vaccine the second half of next year. It was April of this year when they briefed us on that. I told my team that we need to live with the COVID-19 virus. But along the way, we need to identify risks and possible opportunities. Events like this, occurrences like this, like global pandemic, is actually part of the nature of creative destruction that we have noticed in the history or the economic history of civilization. But one thing I'd like to focus here, though we are quite focused on public health, listening to updates from government and the Department of Health, what I'd like to focus on is this risk that we have identified. I call it the challenge of inequality. We have written on this issue for quite some time already, but what this pandemic really compounds is this generational disparities in income, jobs, and opportunities. We have seen the weakness of our healthcare system. We have seen the token character of social protection that has exposed the poor, the vulnerable, the disadvantaged. Inequality, here I speak of in terms of income, jobs, and opportunities, has indeed worsened since the imposition of a national lockdown on March 17 of this year. And one thing I'd like to focus on is that this reflects not only our views in Stratbase, but by our own partner institution, Social Weather Station. Allow me to share certain studies and research that they have done since the start of this pandemic in terms of quality of life. How we have shifted to being losers. We have seen the improvement of views by our people, and this is across sector. This does not reflect only the urban area. This reflects a demographic from rural, urban, rich to the poorest of the poor, educated, uneducated. Imagine the feeling of being losers. That's a feeling of hopelessness. And do they see things changing in their life? A lot of them remain pessimists, which I'd like to share in my next slide. But what's worse is that with every government intervention even by the private sector, intervention even by civil society, local government officials, people are hungry. And the latest survey done just a few days back speak of hunger this month is up by 9.8% to 30.7. That's a substantial number of families feeling hungry. And you see numbers, outstanding numbers of finances released by government, but still people remain hungry. And it reminds us really of where are we moving forward? And the first half data of government, when you look at government data, we've seen an economy being challenged. That's why earlier you could have read in one of our risks, we are in a continuing public health challenges with economic consequences. And data coming from government reflects that. The only bright light is agriculture. And I think we still are lacking in terms of what we have done for agriculture. Here in Stratbase ADRI Institute, we're proud to promote local agricultural cycle. The flow of food and affiliate products must be ensured to unceasingly provide food availability and access to the population that, as I've said and emphasized, are hungry during this pandemic. Our government at all levels should continue to boost its care and support to involve in the local agricultural cycle. We need measures that facilitate selling of produce, unhampered movement to various cities, and even financial assistance coming from the national government. We hear a lot of importation, but we believe that it should be balanced and let the local supply sustain the local demand. We also need to promote sector infrastructure and logistics. Investments in agricultural infrastructure and logistics must be enhanced. Introduction of e-commerce or online agricultural and food transactions also need to be encouraged as we shift to what we call this digital transformation. Developments in the agricultural sector would need the private sector's engagement that will promote long-term interest of local farmers and their produce. We are proud in Stratbase ADRI Institute to speak of what we call the whole of society. The key role of government at the national level, the key role of the private sector. We need that cooperation between government and industry. We need sector to be synchronized to protect and enable agricultural food production and distribution during this pandemic crisis and beyond. It reminds me of a commentary that we published nearly a year ago. We write this weekly commentary in two newspapers, Business World and Field Star. And I remember this commentary in our section, Thinking Beyond Politics. It comes out every Wednesday. And I wanted to end my part with a quote. Support for industries will be essential in this by equipping farmers with the necessary technology and knowledge transfer and access to capital to elevate the industry's competitiveness. The right balance will be beneficial for all stakeholders and complementary industries by ensuring the sustainability of the industries and protecting the interests of consumers by keeping the supply and value chain in check. We need sustained agricultural growth. It's automatically inclusive. And that, I mean, can address the challenge of inequality during this pandemic. Again, good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining us. And we hope collectively we can provide answers and policy directions that can alleviate the agriculture sector to greater heights, even during this pandemic.
Thank you, Professor Manhit, for your welcoming remarks today. Thank you also for introducing me. I forgot, as Professor Manhit said, I'm the Executive Director of Stratbase ADRI. I also wanted to let you know that we have over 100 participants joining us today. So welcome, everybody, and I hope you enjoy the discussion. Next up, we have our, let me just, okay. We have our keynote address. And this is from none other than, hold on, I'm so sorry, technical difficulties on my end, from Yusek Ariel Kayanan of the Department of Agriculture. He is Undersecretary for Operations and Agri-Fisheries Mechanization. Yusek, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everybody. I hope I address it the right, what they call felicity. It's really a good morning. And from the what we call my predecessor in terms of discussion, it's quite good that it was already impressed that there are a lot of disappointment, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of agricultural side. So if I may be allowed, of course, but I may be asking some of your patience here because we will be given opportunity to give the point of view of the agriculture. First and foremost, let me impress that the Department of Agriculture is mandated to promote agriculture development by providing the policy framework, public investment, which was also mentioned a while ago, and support services needed for domestic and going forward export-oriented business enterprise. Guided by its vision of a food secured and resilient Philippines with prosperous farmers and fisher folks, the department collectively empowers farmers. I'll what they call plug on that, empowers farmers and fisher folks and the private sector to increase agricultural productivity and profitability, taking into account sustainability, competitive and resilient technologies and practices. To attain its vision, which you might be very interested to be informed, the department operates on 5 core strategies on farm consolidation, modernization, industrialization, export promotion, and of course, infrastructure development. The DE bolstered these strategies with support services, strengthen food value chain, and increase market access for the marginalized one, which we call smallholders farmers. The DA also focuses on the areas of budgets and investment, legislative agenda, roadmap development, while putting a premium on the role of public and private partnership. That is from where we are born out of the constitutional procedures. On infrastructure development, if I may be allowed to do so, the DA recognizes the role of infrastructure development in improving linkages to the urban and domestic and export market. Various agri-infrastructure projects provide better opportunities to farmers and fisher folk to increase production at lower costs, thereby increasing income and making food available and affordable. I think that is the ingredient of what Mr. Manhit was saying a while ago. There are so many who are hungry. Not angry, of course, yet. Construction, restoration, and rehabilitation of infrastructure improve product delivery while the intent of minimizing loss. We are in the midst of establishing post-harvest facilities for processing agriculture products such as dressing plant and cold storages, also warehouses. The DA has put up, to name a few, the AAA meat slaughterhouse in Batangas that will open in October, and also want to establish further a AAA poultry dressing plant in Bamban-Tarlac that will open before the year ends. Private sector engagement in the build and transfer scheme to accelerate the development of national irrigation systems are badly needed. But of course, not only national laws, but also local policies should be aligned. They should be congruent to whatever the DA should be doing to make use of the full potential of its efficiency. On farm consolidation, DA promotes and support the farm consolidation arrangement for small and medium farms to bring about economy of scale, particularly for crops that requires mechanization and massive use of technology. It aims primarily to make farming more efficient, reduce cost of production, increase farm productivity and income. This only follows the rule of synergy that 1 + 1 should not be 2, but rather it should be more than 2. That the sum of the individual, when sum it all, should be supreme over the sum of the whole. On modernization and industrialization, modernization and the use of modern technology must also cover all crops, including those with export potential in processed or value-added form like coffee, cacao, cassava, tropical fruits, rubber, and among others. Relative to that, there's a need to diversify crop production in the Philippines, as about 80% of the country's farmlands are devoted to only 3 crops, mainly rice, corn, and coconut. Agriculture must be treated as an industry with the objectivity of industrializing the value chain of every agricultural commodity. And it was well exposed during this pandemic. While productivity increase is a major objective, it is equally important to produce more income by value adding, processing, manufacturing, developing markets for both raw and processed agricultural products. It should not be born out of production driven, it should become demand driven. Private sectors are encouraged to invest and set up more agriculture-based industry in the countryside and develop markets for agri-fishery product. On export promotion, the country should have a systematic and a long-term strategy in developing and promoting export of raw and processed agricultural products. DA will strongly partner with the private sector and organized farmers and fishers group to further increase the country's export of farm and fishery products with emphasis on diversified and expanded value chain from farms and fish ponds to processing. A convergence effort of the DA, the whole of the nation approach, DTI, and the other national agencies are necessary to fully implement this so-called strategy. While we promote export, we also take a look at the balance. It was mentioned a while ago, between buying local and of course, the other source, importation. But the main instruction, the policy of the Secretary, import should always be the last sort of resource. Meaning we have to and we should be actually providing it here. The need for balanced supply chain and balancing importing with domestic sources, that there is a what they call buying local means money stays in the country, keeping our economy alive. It also creates local job. Buying local agriculture produce, support our farmers and fisher folks and businessmen in the agriculture and fishery sector. For some people, buying local is a form of ethical consumerism. Buying local and patronizing our homegrown business keep money flowing within the local economy. Small local farms in particular are excellent for economy because they provided more livelihood and occupation, especially in rural and marginalized areas wherein opportunities are less. It was just reported to us, PSA data, a month or more than a month ago, that for every what they call, there's actually a 40% decline in terms of what they call labor or occupation that we've been doing right now. So especially in rural areas and marginalized areas where opportunities are so much less, It supports local business suppliers and the micro, small, and medium enterprises. It also keeps local business afloat, in a way contributes to our nation building. Remember, at this point of time, we are still on the surviving mode. We're not even on the what we call recovery and what we call growing. So the goal is to really survive. On the other hand, importation or buying global means access to products that are either locally unavailable or inefficient to produce and source locally. Pero muna, because sooner or later, we will strive to make it even more efficient, of course, and make our product produce competitive. Take, for example, the what we call rice importation. The Philippines can import rice from Vietnam and Thailand under the ASEAN bilateral cooperation on rice trade. But this option to import was at risk in the second quarter due to the pandemic. Thailand and Vietnam, needless to say, rice production were also affected by drought and shortage of migrant farm workers from neighboring countless due to lockdown, which is also observed here in the Philippines. When some major rice-producing countries decided to stop exportation, global rice supply tightened and the volatility of the costs increased. While at the local level, the Sagip-Saka, which was signed into law last year, champions buying local, Sagip-Saka promotes establishment of enterprises involving agricultural and fishery products, thereby making these products competitive and attractive to the market. An added boom to buying local is the directive of the law for all government entities to purchase agricultural and fishery product directly from accredited farmers and fisher folks, which at this point of time, we are progressively clustering and what we call consolidating. Since the imposition of the community quarantines, there are already 443 local government units that have bought a substantive amount of 2.6 billion worth of agriculture and fishery product from our very own local farmers. It's also called the unsung heroes, for inclusion in the food packs distributed in their constituents. Importation sensitivity to the needs of Filipino farmers and flow of domestic supply as well as demand. Importation of agricultural product has always been sensitive, of course, to the Filipino farmers and a determinant in the flow of domestic supply and demand. Not to mention also that it affects some of our local farm gate price. We have seen a strong reactions to the what we call so-called rice tariffication law as more rice imports entered initially to the country, which substantially it already decreased. 4 million po dati, ngayon po ay nandoon pa rin sa threshold na 2 million metric ton. Farmers and food security groups calls the immediate, what called repealance of the law. The only pleading that we have is let us continue to implement it efficiently and effectively. And there's a time, and there we are actually progressively evaluating it. Then as and when the result of the evaluation will come out, and there are already some what they call progressive output and outcomes, then whatever will be the measures, we will cross the bridge when we go there. So there is already some statistical data coming from PSA that the price of what they call the rice, I mean the consumer's rice, relatively not only decreased, but more so you have so many options right now. So recognizing the situation of the farmers, the government countered with the Rice Resiliency Program immediately for increased productivity. The program provides agricultural inputs which aims to increase local rice production to combat global trade uncertainties and to put the country in a more food secure position, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. Right now, this is in addition, of course, of what was provided in the law. Right now, the DA is intensifying expanding credit facility to serve small-scale farmers and fisher folks and focus on infrastructure development to create better opportunities for smallholders, farmers, and fishers. Another case and a point is the issue of chicken importation, of course. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the market has experienced a sharp decrease in poultry meat demand after major food establishment closed or slowed down in operation. In response, of course, the poultry producers, of course, immediately want us to study the policies as well as guidelines on how we actually manage importation, the sanitary and the phytosanitary importation, and that gains a lot of merit. The Poultry Association, of course, wants more support and calls to a halt for importation of poultry meat, highlight the local producers' position on the issue of the availability of cold storage facility, the disconnect of the produce with the meat retailers and processors, and the prevention in the entry of animal diseases, which is our primordial function. And the Secretary put a lot of weight on it. And in fact, the Secretary's instruction is to put a lot of emphasis and weight on those pleading. To persuade big food establishment to buy local, the government fast tracks the opening of the AAA poultry dressing plant, as mentioned, and cold storage warehouses to give way for those what they call big surpluses that we have right now, which meets the highest standard of food safety and generates more jobs in the locality. Reassessment and strictly monitor cold storage warehouses as well as monitor utilization of imported meat by the National Meat Inspection Services. Progressively, we are upscaling, strengthening, and upgrading it to ensure compliance to all food safety regulation despite of and in spite of this pandemic that we've been having. The private sector, both the private and the public sector, need to support the local agriculture industry, including its farmers and fisher folk, to help ensure food security and support local agriculture industry, including farmers and fisher folks, by COVID-19. The DA calls on big companies, seeds and fertilizers company, agriculture and fishery industry leaders and organizations, as well as agriculture state universities and colleges to join the government's 4Ps or plan, the very own version plant programs, or the 4Ps. In fact, this is what we call the urban agriculture also as an extension. The plant programs ensure sustained food production and availability, food accessibility and affordability, particularly in this time of pandemic, through collaboration with other agencies, private sectors, and local government units. Its aim will be, the program includes the Rice Resiliency Program, which practically aims to increase domestic rice production level from 87% to as high as 94% through the provision of quality inbred hybrid seeds, of course, free irrigation, trainings, as well as provision for credit, and eventually fertilizers were also distributed. The National Corn Program and Cassava Program that enhances corn and cassava production by providing production support service on pest control and management, which might also threaten our productivity. Intensified vegetable production, which includes distribution of planting materials, extension services through the farm field school, and provision of techno packages. Allow me to borrow a special, what they call, how many years, decades ago, a special praise came from no other than Secretary Dominguez. He called it FAITH, food available in the home. So livestock livelihood enterprise that enables farmers, household beneficiaries to produce their own and raise additional income, and provides assistance. Fishery production, by which corresponding program focus on providing production support service such as techno, demonstration, maniculture, the fish cages, and so on and so forth. So the DA recognizes the role of efficient transport also and logistics system for the unhampered movement, which was also emphasized by the previous what they call speaker, the movement of agri-fishery goods and the services. So the DA instituted immediately the food lane system during the height of the community quarantine. It coordinated with the concerned DA offices, national, local, and all the other implementing agencies. The system resulted in less congestion of food and agricultural products in the ports and crossroads, and it facilitated the ingress and the egress of agri-fishery goods and service between regions, provinces, cities, municipality, down to the barangay level. Moreover, the Department of Agriculture is continuously implementing relentlessly the implementation of Kadiwa Yani at Kita, the market systems which sells major agricultural goods at reasonably low prices to help poor Filipino household. It also increases small farmers and fisher folks' income through the direct procuring, direct selling to end user. The Kadiwa Yani at Kita has the following and different modalities, like the Kadiwa Yani at Kita, Kita Retail, Selling, Kadiwa Yani at Kita on Wheels, the Kadiwa Yani Kita Online, the Kadiwa Yani at Kita Buffalo Milk on Wheels, the Kadiwa Yani at Kita Express, and the Kadiwa Yani at Kita Descuentro Caravan, which is in collaboration and coordination with DTI. So the EDA also encourages the private sector, the big companies, to mention agriculture and fishery industry leaders and organizations to adopt a town or a city by investing its agricultural enterprises, such as vegetable gardening, commercial crop production, and raising small ruminant and native chicken. By adopting a locality, the private companies can significantly help in producing more food in community while showcasing their respective products and practicing corporate social responsibility. Groups like Seed Industry Association of the Philippines may establish a nursery to provide seeds and seedling for the area that they will adopt. Other agri-fishery industry stakeholder may provide other inputs such as soil ameliorants, fertilizers, inputs, and other implements. The DA considers different options to support farm gate prices of different commodities. One, to support rice farm gate prices, the DA Special Order 862 series of 2019 that formed a 30-man multi-sectoral task force that would address and fast-track measure to help farmers cope with declining farm gate price, specifically of palay. The task force is composed of experts, economists from academe, the private sector and government, as well as representative of rice farmers, millers, cooperative, and various government agencies related. We call it, again, the whole of the nation approach. With regards to the declining corn prices in recent days, the government is mulling over exporting corn to world market to farmers cope with the declining farm gate price, while have planned to 9 pesos per kilogram to at least 20% lower than the production cost. The department is now also further studying the proper legal backbone to be able to allow corn farmers to be exported, since the NFA has been deregulated by the RTL law in performing so. So with those premise, NFA for rice will continue to buy for its mandate of buffer stocking. Institutional buyers like DSWD, Bureau of Jail Management Penology, Bureau of Correction, Department of Health, and other institutional buyers who have demand will procure and directly will coordinate to organize farmers. LGU mentioned a while ago have been contributing substantive amount, and holding and addressing the holding issues will be provided by the regional field offices. So with all those what we call interventions of what we will be doing, again, we want also to assure that while the price of palay remains to be on course, it should be that it should manifest on the rice that will be sold to the consumers. Wala na po dapat na mas mataas pa dun sa ine-expect natin, and as it progresses, dapat po talaga available and affordable po siya. Recognizing these challenges that hampered productivity, of course, Agriculture Department remains focused on boosting support service to our farmers. The plans of the Department of Agriculture for fiscal year, the way forward 2021, is detailed in the DA National Expenditure Program. Modernization. The department will support the increased use of science-based farming, good agricultural practice, and promote better access to technology in the production, processing, handling, agriculture, and fisheries. Provision of better access to farm and fishery inputs such as seed, planting materials, fertilizer, soil ameliorant, of course, as and when it is needed. For livestock and poultry, provision of animal semen straw, biologic, vaccine, etc., etc. Industrialization and inclusive agribusiness is also very important, and adoption of technology, innovation to promote entrepreneurship and enhance financial management of farm organization and transform them into a viable and global competitive agriculture. Ensure quality of agriculture and fishery product through the development of agri-fishery product standard, registration and licensing, quality control inspection, disease surveillance, and quarantine services. Promote also inclusive agribusiness to focusing on production to consumption, value chain, and inclusive agribusiness to empower farmers, fishers cooperative and association, and extend service reach to marginalized farmers. Export promotion, as mentioned, will be development of export for more segment and improve access to domestic and foreign market to raise the level of competitiveness of agriculture and fisheries. This is to increase access to agriculture product through the conduct of local marketing activities, participate in national and regional exhibits, provide agri-fishery group with market-related assistance, and implement inclusive agribusiness safe innovation hub project. The Farm and Fishery Clustering and Consolidation, or F2C2 for brevity, will advance the interest and condition of small farmers and fisheries by encouraging the adoption of clustering and consolidation strategy in the production, processing, marketing, activities, and community business enterprise. It's in every value chain activity that we have, including the pooling of assets, labor, and all the resources. So for livestock, feed mill-centered livestock production ecosystem, agro-pasture approach and well-delineated community growing territories. For fisheries and aquaculture, community marine and fisheries production zones, community fishery fleet, and community fish pond leases. I mentioned a while ago, infrastructure development. This is to support for the development of infrastructure and common service facilities that will redound to manpower and cost saving and that lead to higher margins for farmers. Of course, I will not miss to mention budget and investment. Work for the higher budgetary support for food security. We have the champions here. May nakita po akong dalawang representative, si Congressman Kabatbat and hindi ko lang po makita yung isa. So, and encourage private sector investment to the development of more farm-based enterprise as well as community for fisher folks. The roadmap development is the what we call more surgical and developmental one, guide the long-term development of the agriculture and fishery sector to the active collaboration of public and private sector and provide a more consistent and coherent basis for the department policy and program support, long-term strategies in the agriculture and fishery sector. Lastly, thank you for your patience, legislative support. Tama-tama po, nandito po ang ating mga ilang representative. Continue to seek legislative support at the national, local level and engage partner with the policymaker in sustaining reforms. Reforms that are politically and institutionally so strong that even on next administration, the only way to amend or change them is only improvement. Thank you very much for your attention, sir.
Thank you very much po, Yusek, for sharing a lot about the efforts and the plans of the department. Already, we've gotten a lot of questions through email and also the Q&A function. So at this point, I also just like to point out that to our participants that you can actually ask questions to our speakers through Zoom's Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your screens. We'll try to get to all of these later in the forum. But now let's move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is the House of Representatives member of Magsasaka Party List, Rep. Argel Joseph Kabatbat. Kong Kabatbat, welcome po.
Thank you, Sir Paco, Yusek Ariel, to our dignitaries, participants, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I'm very honored to be invited in this town hall discussion, especially after I have read names of the participants, mga heavyweights po talaga. Yusek Ariel is my mentor, and I always seek guidance from him. And we are very supportive of the Department of Agriculture, especially sa budget. But anyway, pwede po ba ako mag-share ng screen? I would like to discuss two things that I personally experienced during the early days of lockdown that concerns managing food supply. Ay, okay na.
Icon, we granted you ano po,
Okay
share
na?
screen privileges. There you go. Apo.
Ayan. Thank you. So, I will be discussing two things that these are the things that I've been fighting for since the early days of lockdown. The first one is food sovereignty as compared to food security. And the second is decentralization. As to how I came about this concepts and why we are fighting for these two is due to my personal experience and yung field din natin sa ground and what we believe they need and what we believe should be changed. Ayan. Thank you. But before I proceed, ito po yung sinasabi ng karamihan na realize ng karamihan because of pandemic that working towards food sovereignty and not just food security should be should be adopted. For the longest time, our concept of food security is importation. Although I appreciate the latest pronouncement of the Department of Agriculture that importation should be the last resort. But it is not reflective of the laws that have been passed for the past few decades. Talagang sumama na talaga tayo sa globalization, sa neoliberal policies of importation as our concept of food security. So we want to change that. We should be able to feed ourselves. Yan lang naman ang pinaglalaban namin. And that's what I've discussed during my second privilege speech during the pandemic. And second, agriculture and local farmers. Ito po ang nakikita namin na magsasalba sa ekonomiya natin aside from the MSMEs. If you will notice, ang trend natin laging pababa ng pababa o hindi tumataas ang budget ng agriculture for the past few years. Pero ang agriculture consistently lumalago, although maliit lang. And during pandemic, tumaas po ang contribution ng agriculture sa GDP despite low budget. And public spending for agriculture and the farmers is a sound investment. And kung mapapansin din po natin, during the pandemic, ang talagang tinamaan dito ay ang ating farmers. Although the poorest sector of our society are the fisher folks, pero kasama po ang farmers sa matinding tinamaan. As you will notice, sa spending pattern, access to healthcare, and social mobility, sila yung tinamaan talaga ng mga lockdowns. And although the government declared that we have enough food, yet we should not be comfortable, or we should not hindi dapat tayo mag-relax because importation is still the preferred policy. And although bumaba ang food inflation, meron pa ring food inflation, and more farmers are experiencing financial losses, and the country lacks a clear roadmap to food security, more so for food sovereignty. Again, we appreciate the way forward as campaigned by our good secretary, Secretary Dar. But I believe that the roadmap to food security or food sovereignty should be higher than the cabinet level. Then meron tayong narinig na plan program, kaya lang it's more of a pronouncement than a clear roadmap to food sovereignty or food security. Ito naman po yung mga na-realized ko rin nung pag-iikot ko during the early days of pandemic. There's an institutional friction between the national and local government. Kung papansinin niyo po nung ASF, nagkagulo-gulo sa Congress. Merong mga probinsya na nag-lockdown at may mga probinsyang nagreklamo dahil gusto lang nilang dumaan doon. For example, yung mga baboy sa Pangasinan, hindi makapunta sa Baguio. Yung mga baboy sa Tarlac, di makapunta ng Baguio kasi kailangan lang dumaan ng Pangasinan. Ayaw magpapasok ng Pangasinan. So there's really a disconnect. And this was repeated during the COVID-19 pandemic, yung mga lockdown implementation, napakagulo. And as discussed by Yusek Ariel, kulang tayo sa post-harvest facilities, and the current setup of agriculture, and the farmers are dependent to traders. But the funny and sad thing about COVID-19 is that we have an inefficient supply chain, which also became our source of resilience. Because compared to the US, kung nabalitaan nyo, libu-libong mga baboy yung nilibing nila ng buhay. Dahil nagsarahan ng mga restaurants, walang mapagdalhan yung mga baboy, mas mahal naman kung papakainin mo yung baboy, ilibing mo na lang ng buhay. Ganun na nangyari. Because their supply chain is very efficient. That is the trade-off that you get for having an efficient supply chain as compared to inefficient supply chain. Kasi dito, pag nagsara yung restaurant na sinusupplyan mo ng baboy o ng manok, pwede mo ibenta sa iba. Hindi yung automated na lahat. So, masaya pero malungkot din. Kasi ibig sabihin, ganun tayo kalayo pagdating sa mga first world countries in terms of supply chain. And I also heard from one of the psychologists, yung initial tendency ng mga tao during a crisis is for them magkaroon ng hero complex na ito kami, we will save the day. Kaya nga during the early days of pandemic, ang daming mga nagsulputan na tumutulong sa mga farmers, sa mga nawalan ng trabaho. Pero eventually it will die down, it will subside. Andito na tayo ngayon. Nade-depress na ngayon yung tao, meron tayong mga mental health problems. And most of this small collective incremental efforts from the civil society, okay siya, pero hindi siya sustainable unless the efforts are geared towards sustainability. Ang kailangan po talaga natin, we need to revolutionize the agriculture from the ground up. As mentioned earlier, we've been espousing for food sovereignty as compared to food security. It's not easy. Yeah, it's easier said than done. But we still want to do our part. Kaya nga nung nakaraan po, we sent a policy paper to the IATF to form a food security cluster. Binuo naman. But I've been talking about food security. Ano po ba talaga ang food security? This was initially developed by Via Campesina. It's a global peasant movement. Food sovereignty, although I do not subscribe fully to their definition because parang English language po yan It is not owned by the Americans, by the Australians, or other English-speaking countries. We can have our own definition of food sovereignty. But these are the six important elements and components of food sovereignty. First is it focuses on food for the people because for the longest time, we consider food as a commodity instead of a right. Kumbaga sa aking privilege, sinabi ko na ang tingin natin ngayon sa agrikultura, sa pagkain, ay pagkakakitaan, hindi karapatan. And yan yung isa sa elements ng food sovereignty. And we value the food providers, which is our farmers, our fisher folks. And it localizes food systems. Hindi lang food production ang localized, kundi pati food consumption. Because under the current food corporate regime, mantakin nyo, yung tinanim mong mangga sa Iloilo, aabot pa ng Canada. So, kaya yung manok na inalagaan nila sa Canada, makakarating pa sa atin. So in the process, kailangan mo dyan ng preservatives. So for safer food, actually mas maganda na local food production, local food consumption. And number 4, food sovereignty puts control locally. Before, we used to enter into international agreements that rob the countries of their right to impose laws and regulations for their food policies. And food sovereignty is against that. We should give the country the right to govern themselves, especially when it comes to food production, food consumption, land distribution, and anything related to agriculture. Fifth, it builds knowledge and skills. You know, may I have ano ba to? Meron akong agam-agam sa Western type of agriculture. And partly it's being also exposed by the current government, current administration, and for the past administrations, na we tend to strive for capital-intensive, fossil fuel-driven, industrial agricultural mega farms. Yan ang gusto natin eh. And that destroys ecosystems, sa totoo lang. In fact, pagka ilang daang hektarya, isa lang ang tinanim mo, you destroy the natural predators of the insects. So, dadami insekto. So, kailangan mo maglagay ng mga insecticides. So, alam niyo yun, hindi talaga siya maganda sa ecosystem, pati sa lupa. And food sovereignty is also against that. And number 6, of course, food sovereignty works with nature, as I have explained earlier. Ngayon po, I've been, I was lucky to have been given an exemption sa mga checkpoints during the early days of lockdown. So after my 14 days quarantine, umikot po tayo sa mga trading posts dito sa Luzon. Nagpunta po akong Benguet, sa Nueva Vizcaya, Pangasinan, sa Sariaya, sa Bulacan, just to check on the economic activity on this trading posts. Doon ko na-realize kakaunti lang yung bumabiyahing mga traders ngayon. So, bumagsak ang presyo ng mga gulay at prutas at iba pang bilihin. Ang farm gate price. Then, pagbalik ko naman dito sa NCR, pila ang mga tao sa groceries, pila ang mga tao sa mga public markets. So, doon ko po na-realize na we need to decentralize our public market system because our current public market system collapsed due to pandemic. Ang kagandaan din po nito, nagtayo kami ng mga magsasaka outlet to decentralize the public market. Kaya alam po, napakahirap palang magtayo parang nagtatayo ng bagong business niyan eh. Malawakan eh, mahirap. But this initiative is similar to the ani and kadiwa of the DA. Hindi naman namin sila binabantayan. We were not stalking the DA. We just came up with this initiative. Pero ang na-realize ko po, aside from the public market na kailangang i-decentralize, there is a decentralization happening because of pandemic. Pero before we go, ito po yung situation natin before the pandemic. Pre-COVID-19, yung mga farmers natin, talagang iniwan nila yung mga pagsasaka nila, mga sakahan nila, to work as construction workers and other jobs here in the cities. Pati po yung mga asawa nila, nagpunta na rin sa syudad o kaya nagpunta ng abroad. And if you will monitor, capital and investments were concentrated in the cities, among others. But after COVID-19, ito ang nangyari. Kung makikita nyo, mayroong mga umuwi na nakabisikleta mula dito hanggang Sorsogon. Talagang may mass migration from the cities to the home provinces. Even government spending, papunta na ngayon sa rural areas. In fact, mayroong pinangakong 66 billion immediate stimulus package sa Department of Agriculture. Then, ito naman, bakit great decentralization ng COVID-19? Ngayon na nag-uwian na yung mga tao, we have to follow them to sustain our need for workforce. Although aside from this, meron naman meron mga work from home arrangements na sa tingin ko may institutionalize even after a vaccine is developed. So, COVID-19 in short, is a great decentralization. Ngayon, why do I think that decentralization and food sovereignty are soulmates? Because food sovereignty espouses localizing food production and food consumption. Although sa iba, ang tingin nila dyan, baka yung subsistence farming, but I disagree. We can mas resilient kasi ang localized food consumption and food production, unlike our current food corporate regime. So also, if we pursue decentralization and food sovereignty, ito yung mga top of mind conclusions ko, that we can decongest the cities, we can have cleaner air and less pollution, and more employment, and safer food for all, and higher profits for the farmers. So ito pong ang nakikita po namin, COVID-19 is an opportunity that comes once in a millennium na dapat nating i-take advantage. And sa tingin namin, isa sa mga dapat nating ipaglaban ay food sovereignty and decentralization, institutionalizing the decentralization that is naturally happening in our supply chains, in our agriculture, and in other sectors and industries that we have in the country. So, yun lang po ang contribution natin, ang maiko-contribute ko sa ating discussion pagdating sa managing food supplies. And ang kagandahan po, alam nyo, bago ko po tapusin, ang kagandahan naman po ngayon, lahat pantay-pantay dahil walang nakaranas ng pandemic sa atin. Baga, all of the rules are being rewritten. And I think the country or the nation that are most resilient will emerge prosperous after this pandemic. So yun lang po. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Kong. Thank you, Kong. That the concept of food sovereignty is an interesting one. Definitely makes you think about that one. Yeah, next up. So thank you, po. Next up, we have Mr. Bobby Amores from the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's the director at the PCCI. Mr. Amores?
Yeah.
Apo.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning, Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, binabati ko yung aking kasama sa mga trabahos tungkol sa agrikultura. Nandiyan si Yusek Ariel Kayanan. Matagal ko nang katrabaho sa issues about agriculture yan. And of course, Congressman Kabatbat, for your information, ako po ay kasama dun sa grupo ng number 48 TGP party list ni Congressman Bong Tebes. Ako po yung chairman ng party list. And then also, I would like to acknowledge also my other colleague, Attorney Bong Inchong from the United Broilers Association, who will be discussing lengthily about the issues confronting that industry, and the rest of our distinguished panelists and guests. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Well, as I would like to mention, the Philippine Agriculture Roadmap is putting more emphasis in the tenure of the good secretary, William Dar, is putting more emphasis on increased competitiveness towards higher productivity to achieve this goal of food security and to import only. Sabi nga ni kasamang Ariel, to import only in case of shortfall to stabilize prices and inflation. Now, we also need to export to other countries nearby, China, Japan, and Korea, and to the BRIC economies in order to do this and give aggressive push to have better values also for our farmers and avoiding surplus. Okay, now the COVID-19 pandemic has adversely affected the global community. Our gross domestic product, ito pong Philippines, I will share my slide earlier, no? With this statement muna. The biggest contraction we experience is 16.5% of our GDP over the last 30 years. And the only sectors that posted positive growth in the second quarter, by very minimal, is the agriculture and fisheries sector, which posted a 1.6% despite the pandemic. Before I discuss the main agenda of this forum, allow me to briefly share with you or provide you situationer where agriculture currently stands, even before and during the pandemic, how we are faring with our neighbors in ASEAN, and where we should be moving forward. Can I show me the first slide, please? The first slide, pakibaba lang. Okay. In 2019, agriculture contributed a measly 8.3% or 1.5 trillion out of approximately 18.6 trillion of our GDP. Contribution actually could reach about 30 to 45% if we will include support and allied services. Industry, however, contributed approximately 30%, while services got the biggest contribution at over 60% in the same time. Now, going back, no? In 2019, yung population natin was, I think this was validated again. I think it's about 110 million already. 110 million at this time in 2018. And 53.1% or almost 60 million of the population live in these rural areas. Employment contribution at that time was 24.3% or more or less 13 to 14 million people. While, sad to say, agriculture share to our agri-export was only 8.9% or a measly $6 billion. If you look at the next slide, please. Okay. The development of growth of agriculture in the country is very slow and almost stagnating, and government must accelerate its modernization and industrialization program, which I'm happy to note is being done already and hopefully will improve in the very near future. Next, please. Okay. If you will notice in this slide, we posted a trade deficit of over $7 billion compared to our neighboring countries in ASEAN. This goes to show that we have not really been performing well in terms of our agri-exports. Agri-exports is a benchmark. It's a benchmark of the growth of agriculture in a specific country. Now, it is worth noting that we benchmark ourselves among our peers, which is in ASEAN. Just a few observations. Look at Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Malaysia, who have posted significant trade balance. No, they have a better trade balance versus their total imports, and this is worth mentioning in order for us to see how best we can improve our sector. Next, please. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm just giving a snapshot of our research on the state of Philippine agriculture. Nakikinig po yung ating mga kasama sa Department of Agriculture and of course dun sa ating legislative branch, no? Pakibaba mo nga dun sa fisheries, no? That's banana. Okay. Our fishery industry is in deep trouble actually. Due to the present ban in the use of modified Danish sign method, or what you call locally as hulbot-tulbot, over 200,000 fishermen in the country have lost their jobs in pangingisda. This also led to which led to the importation. Ito, mga nangyayari talaga. It led to the importation of frozen fish like galunggong, which is mackerel, and bonito or tulingan, to address the supply issues, especially in the National Capital Region. The benchmark of the fishing industry, because of its high consumption and demand in almost all segments of our economy, is the galunggong and tulingan. Approximately 100,000 fish, banyeras of fish. These are data which were obtained through our research team, okay, and various checking in the different parts of the country, especially in the main regions of the NCR. Approximately 100 banyera, 100,000 banyeras by 33 kilos a day is lost, which is about 70% of the Metro Manila NCR consumption. Now, looking at our recommendation, based on a study which can be validated again by our current dispensation, recommendation of the lifting of the ban of this hulbot-tulbot to allow these fishermen to go fishing in compliance with the BIPAR approved method of fishing. According to this study presented to the private sector, the MDS is not destructive to the environment. And according to BIPAR, as cited in Senate Committee on Agriculture Resolution 934, submitted to the Senate, medyo meron namang modification na pwedeng magawa para hindi masira yung ating coral reef. Next, please. Let us look at this industry, the banana industry. Another industry that's not been performing well is the banana industry. I'm talking about the fresh Cavendish banana, which is a major export of the Philippines, which used to belong to the over $1 billion category as far as Philippine agri-exports. Well, we had this issue of the dreaded Panama disease, or called the Fusarium wilt. And of course, the production has been decreasing. Although it has been decreasing, even its participation in the export market has also been decreasing and affected because of very strong competition with Ecuador and also some high tariffs that we experience in Korea, China, and Japan. And the latest information that we received, it's because of the new entrants in this industry competing in the same markets that we have been dominating for many, many years, Cambodia and Vietnam. Exactly the same variety, exactly the same quality, but at a lower price. Just for your information, these two countries are exporting about 450 by 40 feet containers a week to China. And our immediate recommendation is, meanwhile, while we are addressing our issue on the Panama disease and these market problems, we want to encourage our farmers to do substitute planting like Cardaba banana or Saba. Cardaba banana or Saba, incidentally, the product out of this variety is called banana chips and frozen banana. Banana chips is now being marketed all over the global markets, almost 70 or 80 countries now, and still exponentially growing. So this is an opportunity that the industry has been suggesting. Next, please. Sorry, dairy industry. Okay, just to inform the body, there is a huge disparity between our import and local production versus our domestic requirement. We only produce less than 1% of our total annual dairy requirement. Take a look at this slide. In 2019, our total milk production was only 24,000 metric tons or 24 million liters compared to 3 million metric tons of import. Okay. We import from New Zealand Netherlands, Australia, and the USA. What is our the immediate recommendation of the private sector or the stakeholders who are involved in this industry? To import 10,000 heads of hybrid dairy animals to augment the production and distribute these animals to responsible dairy farmers and cooperatives, which may be supervised by the regional DA offices in order to avoid mismanaging or just slaughtering these cattle, uh, therefore preventing the purpose of the importation. And of course, another recommendation is the immediate improvement of genetic materials by way of artificial insemination, which can only be done and implemented if the Department of Agriculture to the Bureau of Animal Industry can deploy more technicians from the dairy board or responsible dairy agency to execute this artificial insemination program all over the country. Next, please, the poultry industry. This is another very problematic sector. The rampant importation has been hurting our domestic poultry raisers and producers. No, this is a data that was sourced in 2019. We imported 338,000 metric tons versus a production of 261,000 metric tons. All in all, nag-impact ito ng oversupply and further aggravated by the pandemic. And this was already discussed by the good congressman earlier and maybe Undersecretary Kayana kung ano nangyari. Anyway, our distinguished colleague, Attorney Bin Insong, can expound on this specific industry later. Next, please, the hog industry. This is an industry that we, at the moment, do not advise our agripreneurs to really venture in. Luzon Island has been devastated by African swine fever virus, especially Region 3, and the disease is fast spreading in Region 1, 2, and 4. The supply of pigs is not enough to meet the demand in NCR and the rest of Luzon. Now, in order to augment the supply, there are shipments coming from some ASF-free areas in Visayas and Mindanao, which are done through a color coding scheme being implemented by the Bureau of Animal Industry. Incidentally, these informations were advised and informed by the major players in the hog industry, which are part of our Agri-Fisheries Alliance team. At this time, importation from ASF-free sources is needed to balance supply and stabilize prices. We therefore also recommend temporarily from the hog raisers to temporarily shift to other means like dairy production, rabbit raising being recommended by Mr. Rosendoso, or grow high-value crops since availability of vaccines is still uncertain at the moment. Next, please, the rice industry. Although it was already expounded by the good Undersecretary, the enactment of rice tariffication law has opened the country to a lot of rice imports. Now, Philippines is becoming the world's biggest rice importer next to China. The policy shift was apparently to bring down cost of rice, unfortunately, to the detriment of the Filipino rice farmers. Here is a data that we gathered from the stakeholders themselves. In 2019, total rice production was 11.4 million metric tons. This is rice, or at about 60-something% recovery. This is about 19 million metric tons. The per capita consumption or demand based on 110 million population is about 12.8 to 13 metric tons, or about a little over 100 kilograms per capita. So there is a deficit of about 1.4 to 1.6 million metric tons. However, due to the RTL, the rice tariffication law, the Philippines has imported about close to 3 million metric tons, resulting to a drastic drop of domestic prices. Even at this point in time, we have been receiving complaints, and it is being published, that in some regions, prices have dropped considerably, and farmers have been complaining about losses. What we recommend the following, no? As what already explained by the USEC Ariel, stringent SPS measures for quality importation, posting of ban on import license in order not to abuse the application on import license. You cannot import unless you consume your import license. Campaign on improved high-yielding planting materials, such as hybrid rice or any other recommended improved variety, in order to increase productivity and lessen our dependence on import. Although sooner or later we will have problems if productivity on these regions that we are depending will also decrease. Now, what are the challenges to Philippine agriculture? Look at this slide. These are decades-old challenges of the entire Philippine agriculture. We all know that cost of logistics is still high, production costs, we have food safety issues, the overlapping implementation of the Food Safety Act, which is being addressed now through a cooperative discussion with the private sectors and practitioners in the industry itself, cooperating with the different government agencies under the Department of Agriculture. Now we have an imbalance of the market versus the supply ability, which is also related to logistics and, of course, the choice of crops to be produced in specific regions in relation to market demand. Technology and product development is still a work in progress. However, because of certain programs, we really hope that this will take in effect sooner in order to address issues regarding these concerns. Now, we have this long time problem of access to credit and financing. This remains unsolved because of certain monetary policies of our government in the central bank, and of course, on how, let's say, funds from the Department of Agriculture can be downloaded in a manner that it can be conveniently accessed by the stakeholders. This is still a big challenge. We know the efforts under the ACPC program, but there is a big challenge on how really to access that to the lowest level, to the 50,000, 20,000, 100, and million level access to this credit. It's still a work in progress because the rules are still being crafted, how to simplify these rules, the same as what they're doing in Vietnam and Thailand, where access to credit is a very simple requirement that is needed among stakeholders and borrowers. Now let's go to the challenges to the food supply chains. Going to your specific topic on food supply chain management, the COVID-19 pandemic has put unprecedented strain in the food supply chain industry. The disruption is different from what we normally experience because it does not affect a single part of the supply chain, but even during the duration is a challenge. We have experienced reduction in farm labor and output processing, issues in transport and logistics. No, we have a lot of challenges because of the rules that were implemented and the rules that are being straightened up. And we also thank the DA and DTI for the efforts being done in order to address the situation. However, there is much to be done in order to improve connectivity. Well, among others, not only in our domestic affairs, but globally, most of these disruptions are a result of policies to contain the spread of the virus. Certainly, this pandemic, no? Okay, look at that. Retail food demand soared while restaurant reservations collapsed. So we have to create an efficient and stable food supply chain. That's the major recommendation. Certainly, this pandemic has really caught us all unprepared. Personally, this is also a different experience for me in my over 4 decades, actually about 48 years already in agribusiness. Ito po ang aking karanasan. I'm already in my 48 years in agribusiness. Mainly planting, processing, exporting fresh fruits and vegetables, where we need to reduce operations and shipment of goods due to the effect of this pandemic. We really had difficult time managing the crisis, and even until today, we are coping and trying to survive. This is another issue that is worth mentioning, which has something to do with managing the supply chain. Next, please. We have pending market issues. Okay. We know we also face difficult fight for our exports. We have an ongoing market access issue with Indonesia. We are not able to export shallot onions. What we import a lot of kopiko from Indonesia, mind you, hundreds and hundreds of millions. But export of small agricultural products, we lost about 10,000 metric tons of this market share. Anyway, something is being done here, which is being aggressively looked at right now. We have export ban of young coconut and mangoes to Taiwan, which markets we used to serve more than 30 years ago. So something is being done on this already, thanks to the efforts also of the DA. We hope that sooner we will be open this market. Export of fresh okra and other vegetables to Korea. These are a work in progress, which will of course help us in managing supply chains going to connecting to the market. Because of all of these challenges, we opted to organize a collaboration with our government agencies. We call this collaboration work. Next slide, please. Aspire. Aspire is the agribusiness support for promotion and investment in regional enterprises. The mission of Aspire is to extend support to our farmers and suppliers and provide them with the right information on what to produce in order to meet the demands and requirements of the market. Okay? So ito po collaboration, pinirmahan po ito ng Department of Agriculture, the DTI, and of course PCCI representing the other private sector organizations. It was signed twice during the time of Secretary Piñol, and it was signed again during the 45th Philippine Business Conference with the reinforced provisions in order to strengthen the program. Next slide, please. Under this, we identified these export champions which can be readily be promoted because of the available market in the domestic and in the export market. Mango, our supply has been declining in the last 10 years, but the market is still there, especially on the process side of mango, which is frozen mango and dried mango, which is about selling to about 90 countries all over the world. We have this cacao. We have this alternative crop called saba, banana, cardaba as a variety, which we described earlier as a substitute for our problem of the Cavendish in growers. We have the young coconut, so we can expand our market. We can export to Taiwan and to the other countries outside Asia. Mind you, Thailand is exporting over 100 million young coconuts all over the global world market. Tayo, I think we're just exporting a little, a handful. Kulang kasi tayo sa interventions sa young coconut, genetic improvement, and of course, market access. And this one, another priority commodity which is recommended by the Aspire Group is ube. Ube is a root crop which is growing in terms of its demand both in the domestic and in the export market. You can see ube ice cream, ube powder, and ube preparations in markets like Costco, Walmart, and Trader Joe in the USA, and the chain supermarkets both in Germany, in EU, and the United Kingdom. Next, please. On our recommendations. Okay. In order to address managing the food supply chains, in order to connect it to the market, so prior to the COVID-19, we have been in discussion for a project with the USA Delivered to undertake the profiling of producers, farmers, and market buyers so that we can easily tag the areas that produce certain commodities and match them with the prospective buyers. We have discussed collaboration work with a group under our Agri-Fisheries Alliance to include it in our Aspire marketing platform where farmers and producers can readily meet and do business online. We call this the Agri-Food Hub, inspired by PCAPI Chair, Mr. Philip Ong, and the rest of our Agri-Fisheries Alliance team. Agri-Food Hub is an easy access to market information. It involves, you can find up-to-date market information, and of course, it has other aggregate access to services such as logistics, technology, and financing, including storage. Next, please. We also have, under the Philippine Chamber of Commerce, PCCA, its own e-commerce platform for its members, which can be utilized for B2B between farmers, producers, and consumers. It's called Shop All. It is like a Lazada type of marketing platform, e-commerce platform. It will be officially launched during the 46th PBC conference on October 7 and 8. And we will be announcing further information on how to go about these two marketing platforms. Next, please. Addressing the issues, again, is urban agriculture. The Department of Agriculture is now espousing also urban agriculture, and even we in the private sector as part of the plant program. If you have plant program, there should be market, or buy. This is true and practical, especially in times of health crisis for food security also. We need to have direct and immediate access to food. I believe our local government unit should incorporate urban farming as part of its policy agenda. The pot farming, itong mga tinatanim ng mga gulay and other high-value crops, both lowland and upland, in small technology-driven, low-cost production setup platform, can be done and expanded from within the NCR in our small backyards, even in the windows, sheds, in the rooftops of condos, and etc. Small areas of 10 square meters, 5 square meters will do as part of your food security and of course, part of managing your food supply chain amidst this pandemic. What are the other things that must be done? Next slide, please. The disruption, next slide, please. The disruption that we are currently experiencing, next slide, please, is also an opportunity for us to learn and do something to correct the loopholes in the food supply chain. We should implement policy interventions that would create an efficient and stable supply chain so that transport of goods will be a non-firm. I have outlined some of the policy recommendations by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which I totally agree we should be adopting and implementing. We must also adapt the rebooting agriculture program of the current Secretary, Department of Secretary William Dar, in order for us to be able to really redirect agriculture where it should be. We must be able to create a diversified source supply to allow companies along the food chain to adapt rapidly when input sources were compromised by transport or logistic disruptions. Another more important advocacy work that we have been trying to work with government is to the harmonization of some domestic and export regulations compliant to the needs of the global market. It has to be simplified to increase our agri-exports, coupled with a more proactive approach from concerned bureau agencies, especially on market access issues. On a personal note, I am very glad that the agriculture and food has become a subject matter in a number of forums I have been attending, even before the pandemic and more so during the pandemic. Almost a lot of forums that I have been invited to are dealing with these issues on the food supply. I hope that all this would translate to policy recommendations and action towards achieving a resilient and sustainable Philippine agriculture with supply stability and supply balance of our products in the agri-food sector. Maraming salamat and good day to all of you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bobby Amores of PCCI. Next up, we have Dr. Rolando Briones, who's a Senior Research Fellow at the Philippine Industry for Development Studies. Dr. Briones, can we hear something from you? We have 15 minutes.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I share my screen? Okay. Yes, so this is a study conducted for Philippine Institute for Development Studies as a policy notes. It draws on a lot of secondary data and literature, and it's about food security. And actually, a lot of it is kind of repetitive to what we've already heard from the very distinguished speakers that have come before. But there might be one exciting point, as you will see. So definitely, when the quarantine measures were imposed, government saw that they would be extremely disruptive. So from the very beginning, food and agriculture was classified as essential activities exempted from restrictions. So despite that, was the agri-food system able to function well during the pandemic? So apparently no, okay, but let's nuance that a little bit. In fact, empirically, Philippines has applied one of the most stringent responses. This is based on an index developed in Oxford, Hall et al. And it showed that really for the longest period of time, Philippines was right up there at the maximum level of indicators for stringency, like closure of schools, prohibition on public gatherings, stay-at-home orders, etc. In this chart, you'll see it compared with the countries like Thailand and Vietnam, which, although stringent, were far less so compared to Philippines. And whenever they matched the Philippines, their duration of lockdown was quite low. Now, during this period, there were certain sectors that were allowed to open up. So to facilitate this, the DA implemented a food lane pass program. Actually, this was already in place even before the pandemic. But it was fast-tracked, put online, and expanded. By virtue of the Price Act, a price freeze was also imposed from the start of the declaration of public health emergency, good for 60 days. Now, despite this, though, you can see the stringency plus the openness given to agriculture, there was still this divergence between the national directive and actual policy on the ground, especially that implemented by local government units. So this led in the first few weeks after the imposition of the enhanced community quarantine to some disruption, in fact, occasionally severe disruption. But over time, there was a process naman. This triggered a process of discussion. You could see naman also the IATF rolling out the rapid pass system parallel to the food lane pass. Also, the policy to dismantle barangay checkpoints in national roads and the takeover of checkpoints by the Philippine National Police. So all of these measures, plus constant, through the Task Force COVID of DA, they were able to discuss with concerned agencies how to coordinate and troubleshoot issues. The divergence led to fewer reports of disruption by May of 2020. Pero hindi lingid sa atin, we've already discussed the dire contraction of GDP in the second quarter on year-to-year basis. Note that the biggest contributor to this contraction is household consumption. For the first time in many years, household expenditure actually declined. And that's about 70% of GDP. Although the sharpest drop is actually investment, the gross domestic capital formation, which is already on a downward trend, a negative territory, even during the first quarter. Note that there was also a steep collapse of both exports and imports. So decline in exports subtracts from GDP, but actually declining imports adds to GDP. And that has some implications down the line. Let's look at what happened to employment. So in quarter two, well, maybe first two columns are about the difference between the two quarters mentioned, the two survey findings mentioned. So we have July 19 to April 2020, what was the change in the number of workers? And then July 19 to July 2020, 1 year, what happened to the number of workers? So in the first column, there was a overall 21% drop in employment across all sectors. The steepest decline by April 20, benchmark to July 2019, was in industry at 29%, services 22%. Agriculture also fell, but only, relatively speaking, 10%. In quarter three, the story continues of continued contraction relative to the benchmark July 2019 in the whole workforce of the country, most especially in services, followed by industry. But interestingly, agriculture posted a 12% increase in number of workers in July 2020 versus July 2019. Then also, if you disaggregate, it's already been pointed out that agriculture rescued, as it were, the economy by a 1.6% increase in the second quarter versus contraction of 23% and 16% respectively of industry and services. All right, this is the exciting part, imports. Now, imports, I acknowledge, are a source of food supply, but are politically fraught policy. Note that I had already pointed out some figures where imports had already fallen off on their own accord. No? Here I just highlight two products. This is poultry and pork. So you can see there was even in pork, as a poultry, there was a sharp drop. It's pretty obvious for pork. It's dropped from November downwards to April, recovered a bit in May already, because there's a lack of local supply, because it has been pointed out, there's a raging pandemic, as it were, counterpart of African swine, because this African swine fever is originally from Africa, but it's now an equivalent pandemic among swine. Note also that poultry, there's still a high level of importation, although in the three-month period of February to March to May, it's on the average lower than the preceding 3-month period. So there's been calls, this has provoked a lot of calls for quantitative restrictions. My view of this is we have various other means of protecting the local industry, namely by boosting cost competitiveness, by implementing strict sanitary and phytosanitary measures, as well as high tariffs. Actually, both of these products, they're still in the 40% tariff range, together with 35% for rice, 40% for corn, coffee, and so on. I would caution that implementing old pre-WTO style quantitative restrictions may undermine our ability to lobby for a more open food trading system, seeing that we are dependent on openness of international markets on the import side, such as in, say, rice. Food prices. Well, there was supposed to be a price freeze, which seems to be okay. It was observed, or what happened to milkfish was consistent with a price freeze, but basically not any other single commodity classified as basic necessities. So what we can see in round sky is running up to March 16, the declaration of enhanced community quarantine, there were already erratic changes in price. And then further volatility immediately afterwards. Then we have a break in the data set, unfortunately. This, by the way, is Metro Manila daily data collected by the Department of Agriculture. Then when the data set resumes, prices are still volatile, but on a fairly low end. So it seems that after the supply disruptions had already been sort of resolved more or less by this time, what we can see here is weak consumer demand, because after an initial panic buying just before the pandemic, there's now a dramatic contraction. We saw already a while ago the decline in aggregate household expenditure, plus the inaccessibility of restaurants, limited access to markets, as well as, of course, lack of income. So that decline in employment we saw a while ago must have an impact on household purchasing power, and therefore their ability even to buy such basic necessities as food. So here is, I had some effort to look at what happened to volatility of prices. So this is, I have a measure here called coefficient of variation. None of them exhibited zero except milkfish. So essentially milkfish was the only one that followed price freeze. But even though after the price freeze, it still exhibited no volatility based on the DA data set. There's a pattern among these, and these are some of the major consumed commodities. These are not all, okay? But among the major consumed commodities, bangus, rice, pork, chicken, some of the vegetables, ampalaya, eggplant, the pattern is volatility tends to peak. So mababa, then tataas siya around late March, early April, round about that time. And then it will taper off again. There's one exception though, yung ampalaya nag-peak ulit dito, pero it's a rather exception. The rest are going down. So talagang nagkaroon ng initial volatility because of that disruption associated with the initial phase of the lockdown. But I think this data suggests that more or less situation has stabilized, although at low levels. So what is the conclusion that we can draw? So tentatively, no, because this has been a fairly quick review. I would join the call of earlier speakers that there should be harmonization now of policies. We should no longer be caught flat-footed kung nag-second wave or Christmas surge or whatever, na hindi na maulit yung food supply disruptions that we have already learned our lesson. Now, to combat the decline in purchasing power, affected households and workers should be provided sufficient levels of social protection. I think government is already put the policy in place, put the law in place. It's now just a matter of implementation for those social amelioration funds to really reach the intended beneficiaries. Especially in agriculture, the stimulus program. So it's quite sad, no, that during the pandemic, DA suffered a loss in budget, a cut in its original budget proposal. But still, whatever is provided should be targeted towards appropriate levels of support for small farmers and fisher folk especially. The bigger ones, of course, they can take care of themselves. So government production support should really be targeted towards the smallholders, as Yusek Ariel has referred to them. And here is my most exciting recommendation. I think the Philippines should lobby for continued openness of international markets for food products in order to ensure its own food security and lead by example. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you po, Dr. Briones. Next up po, sorry, I'm moving quickly because we are a bit behind schedule. I'm moving quickly now to Mr. Bong Inchong. He's the president of UBRA, United Broiler Raisers Association. Mr. Inchong.
Good morning to everyone. Good morning to my colleague Bobby Amores. Morning to Professor Manhit. Good morning to those who are watching. I will not make any slide presentation, but I will focus on the objective as stated in the invitation to me. That the end goal of this activity is to underscore the need for a post-COVID-19 agricultural plan. Of course, there's this expectation that I will discuss chicken as stated by my friend Bobby Amores, but I will just limit myself to a few sentences later. But the more important thing is to focus on broad agriculture. And why are we here? Why is it the agricultural sector is like this, very problematic through more than 3 decades? The problem is we have been very ideological in our approach to policies and support to our sector. Our problem is government. I would not belabor what happened during the lockdown. I've spoken at length on this matter with media. Suffice it to say that our members will not support any move towards federalism because the problem during the lockdown was mainly the barangays and some of the LGUs. And I will leave it at that. Of course, I will acknowledge certain personalities, Assistant Secretary Christine Evangelista of the DA and Undersecretary Bernie Flores of the DILG during the lockdown. They were very helpful. In effect, they unintentionally they maintain peace and order at the checkpoints and at the different municipalities because they mediated between our members and some of the well-intentioned and ill-intentioned characters out there. Now, to focus on the agricultural plan, therein lies the root of our problem. This crisis merely laid bare that we have no agricultural plan because the Department of Agriculture, through several administrations, refused to implement the law. There is a law. Refused to implement the law, the AFMA, Agricultural Fisheries Modernization Act. And that Agricultural Fisheries Modernization Act is part of the design of the WTO. Let us set aside the issue of whether or not getting into the WTO was an act of wisdom. Let us set aside that. But even within the by getting into the WTO, it is unfortunate we did not follow the design. The design of the WTO was you remove the quantitative restrictions, you have market access, but you allow what is called in the WTO as domestic support, meaning policy support and subsidies, production subsidies, and then export subsidies, and then trade remedies, and then sanitary, phytosanitary rules. Locally, we implemented the design through laws. Domestic support, we implemented, or the law was passed through the leadership of then Senator Angara, the Agricultural Fisheries Modernization Act. It was supposed to anchor policy support and subsidies, or at least budgetary support. That did not happen. The law is there after 23 years. I challenge anyone to argue with me if it was implemented. I will cite specific provisions later. And then the trade remedies, the anti-dumping laws, the countervailing laws to address subsidies, the special safeguards. The government has been very passive in implementing. Antayan mo nang mapinsala yung sektor bago gagalaw. In other jurisdictions, proactive, malayo pa, wala pang problema, meron ng nakakasa na pangtulong sa mga sectors. And the reason for the non-implementation of the law and the passiveness, yun nga, it's ideological. This belief that import liberalization would be of great help to the general population. The first step we need to take if we are going to come up with an agricultural liberalization plan is to take a second look at the notion that importation will lead to competitiveness, will force players to become competitive, and that imports will also benefit the consumers. In particular for broilers, may I invite you to our website. You just Google UBRA website. We posted on September 28 a set of data which will show you that imports have no impact on retail prices. It will also show you that there is a disconnect between retail prices and farm gate prices. There is a problem in how the product reaches the consumer. And if we can address this, perhaps there will be an increased level of less harmful coexistence between imports and local production. Perhaps that is saying too much already. Now, this need for a plan has acquired urgency because of the pronouncement of NEDA Secretary Carl Kendrick Chu, I think 2 weeks ago, September 17, in response to the question of Senator Drilon on why the budget of the Department of Agriculture was reduced. He said, after many years of throwing money at the Department of Agriculture, the performance has not been commensurate to the resources poured into the sector. To a certain extent, he is correct. And the reason for that, the Department of Agriculture, through several incarnations, through several administrations, refused to follow the law, to implement the AFMA, to proactively implement the trade remedies. And therefore, you have this chaos within the sector. There is no plan. Of course, our friends at the Department of Agriculture will point out that there is this new thinking from Secretary Dar, but with all due respect, that is only the thinking of Secretary Dar. AFMA requires that, Section 13 of AFMA requires, back in 1997, it was passed in 1997, it required that there should be an agricultural fisheries modernization plan crafted after consultations with stakeholders, farmers, producers, related government agencies. Maybe they were referring to the budget and the finance people. And the consultation will not be only in the crafting or the formulation of the plan, but also in the implementation. so that there will be monitoring and assessment of the impact of the programs. And again, it is obvious, given the numerous scandals through the decades, the reason why the several administrations of the Department of Agriculture did not want to implement the AFMA. And another provision, because this will address a question I read posted, addressed to me as president of UBRA, why don't we just self-regulate our volume and stop blaming importation? You know, there is a Philippine competition law. I cannot go, by the way, I cannot go to the major players like Cargill, Cargill of America, CP of Thailand, East Hope of mainland China, New Hope of mainland China, Leong Hap of Malaysia, Bounty and San Miguel of the Republic of the Philippines, and tell them, you limit your production so that we can give space to importation so that the importers will not complain. And also, we might be subject to legal action by the Philippine Competition Commission. I do not know how it is done by the processors because the question came from a processor. If they self-regulate and talk to one another about their volumes and limit themselves, perhaps they can give us a tip on how they do it without being exposed to legal action by the Philippine Competition Commission. But moving forward, under sections 38 to 45 of the AFMA, the DA is required to come up with, to establish a national information network which will provide all stakeholders, prospective investors, bankers, financiers, the information regarding supply, demand, price trends, market trends, forecasts, R&D, innovations, etc. So that people on their own, because this is consistent with the doctrine of the WTO of free enterprise. So that given the right information coming from, not from industry, but from government, which is supposed to be neutral, you have this data and you can decide on your own, am I still going to invest in broiler operations or in hog operations or in corn or in rice, given the planting intentions based on supply and on the demand. Right now, we do not have that, and that has been fatal for everyone. And you have a situation wherein consumers are complaining and producers are complaining. Consumers are complaining about affordability. Producers are complaining about low farm gate prices. And the root of it all is the stubborn refusal of the DA to follow the law. With all due respect to the new thinking that has been praised by the World Bank, that is the thinking of Secretary Dar and his team. It did not go through consultations in accordance with Section 13 of the AFMA. If we are to move forward, given the opportunities mentioned by Representative Kabadbat, we need to re-examine. We need to go beyond ideology and doctrine. We keep on saying that Doctor, with all due respect to Dr. Briones, we have met before. He has been very cordial to me. But we need to re-examine how the other countries are playing the game. It must be noted that the NEDA and many economies are very silent about the issue of subsidies. The United States has had several versions of the Farm Bill. They subsidize producers and consumers. Do we have an equivalent bill or law for our producers and consumers? No. In the first place, there is no plan. And now we are faced with the situation wherein the NEDA Director General, the Secretary of NEDA, is comfortable with the idea of reducing the budget of the DA because there is no confidence in the DA. Because there is no plan. It is understandable. My only disagreement with the pronouncement of Secretary Chua 2 weeks ago was that he said that the problems are rooted in the restrictive policies in place. I beg to disagree because we are very famous in the WTO in 1995 for submitting one of the lowest sets of tariff commitments or bound rates in 1995. You can verify this with the former Undersecretary Segfredo Serrano and Mr. Romeo Royan-Doyan of the then Philippine Peasant Institute, now Centro Saka. He has a paper on the matter. So there is a serious need to re-examine how we approach agricultural policies. We need to look at how the other countries are playing the game. I am not saying that by being in the WTO we made a major mistake, because in fairness to the WTO, there are players in the WTO that have succeeded. Number one is China. China is probably the most successful. On the opposite end is probably the United States, which ended up hollowing out its manufacturing sector and ended up electing a fellow like Trump. Because the union people there, those who were displaced by the migration of industries to China, voted for Trump, and now they have this mess in the United States. They have this fellow there as president. So, moving forward, let us re-examine, let us not be ideological in our approach in policy making. We should not instinctively bow down to the altar of globalization and free trade, just as if it is infallible. We should look at experience, not only our own experience, but also that of other countries. Because we have been, frankly speaking, we have been made to play the fool in the system of the WTO. Because we did not implement the design. Under the WTO, under the concept of the de minimis, you are allowed, developed countries are allowed to provide subsidies to the extent of 10% of the gross value of agriculture. Developed countries are allowed to the extent of 5%. And this issue of subsidies is a major issue. I do not know why economists here and our government is silent, because it caused the failure of the Doha round of the WTO. It is strange to me that economists are very silent about the subsidies of other countries, and we are so miserly to the extent of reducing the budget of agriculture. When it comes to local agriculture, mabuti pa sabihin na we are not really interested in agriculture and people should not invest anymore. And you have this now situation, for example, in rice, the Rice Tariffication Act. People are misled to think that rice prices, retail prices went down substantially for the benefit of the consumers. That is correct if you are going to use 2018 data. And it is not valid to use 2018 data. Excuse me. I'm sorry. It is not valid to use 2018 data because that was the crisis year. It was the time when the NFA failed to import for the lean months. Oil prices were high. We were a step or two addressing core inflation because money supply was relatively loose, at least according to analysts here and abroad. And also there was an El Nino, if I remember correctly, in 2018. Unfortunately, those who are in favor of, or both in favor or against RTL, they both use 2018 data. And we are now faced with the situation where policy is distorted. And also, unfortunately, you have this situation wherein we encourage farmers to plant, and yet we expose them to low prices, to low price imported rice. And then we allocate budget to support them. Isn't that insane? Mas mabuti pa bayaran mo na lang ng diretso. Huwag na kayong magtanim, bigyan mo na lang ng pera. Parang inuulol natin yung magsasaka. Tadramahan natin ito, tutulungan namin kayo. Pero pag panahon na ng ani, papabayaan ka mapinsala ng mga imported products na tinutulungan ng mga bansa na pinanggagalingan ng mga gobyerno nila. Tayo hindi eh. And also, we really, in taking a look at and in planning for post-COVID, perhaps if there are moves again for liberalization, I hope perhaps we should take a look at the way China did it, the way they made the reforms. According to Dr. Ram Gopal Agarwala, who was then chief of the World Bank office in Beijing, the Chinese would sequence their reforms. Before they liberalize, they would do everything first. Am I supposed to end?
Yeah, opo. Medyo overtime na po ng konti. So if you can wrap up po, that would be great.
Yes, sir. We really need to re-examine where we're going. There is no plan. The new thinking being praised by the World Bank is only the new thinking of the secretary. No matter whether, I am assuming it is in good faith and he has the ability to do so, but it was done as with other plans before, without consultations with the stakeholders and other agencies. We will not move forward as long as we do not follow the law. Thank you. Thank you for the patience of everyone.
Thank you po, Mr. Inchong. Don't worry po, we have a couple of questions here na hopefully we have enough time later that I might be able to ask them of you to answer. Okay po. So so next we'll move on to our next speaker. Next up we have Ms. Stephanie Nicole Garcia, the president of the Philippine Association of Feed Millers, Inc. Ms. Nikki Garcia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll get right to it due to time constraints.
Yeah, thank you.
The Philippine Association of Feed Millers Incorporated, or PAFMI, is a business association that engages in the production and distribution of agricultural food and poultry, livestock, and aqua sector. It aims to develop an effective and efficient network for sourcing quality feed inputs for its 35 members, whose production accounts to around 70% of the local feed milling sector. The association is engaged in programs and projects that help the sector produce quality, consistent, affordable, and safe animal and aqua feeds. Our goal is to also protect our market, or the locally grown and farmed poultry, livestock, and aqua sector. Our sector serves as one of the major links within the agricultural production chain. We are the in-between of the local feed input farmers, specifically corn, coconut, and molasses producers, amongst others, and poultry, livestock, and aqua producers. On the local corn consumption, we maintain that feed milling sector has always been buying and will continue to buy from our local corn farmers. Rest assured that we are open to actively collaborate with local corn stakeholders to identify the best and most inclusive policy that will address the current local corn situation. Your growth and success is ours as well. Animal feeds account for 80% of the cost to grow poultry and livestock in the Philippines. Our effort to improve our business greatly impacts the poultry, livestock, and aqua sectors' ability to generate profit and to deliver goods to Filipino families at a more reasonable and affordable price. The failure of the poultry and livestock sector is also the failure of the feed millers and corn farmers. Likewise, their profitability and sustainability are our main concern in the feed milling sector and also of the corn sector. Nandito po kami para makipagtulungan. PAFMI envisions a collaborative partnership with the government. To date, the association has taken an active stand in issues that affect us and our allied industries. We are currently helping the government in its campaign against avian influenza, African swine fever, and lately COVID-19 in imported meats, especially from Brazil. We are engaged in an information campaign to educate pork producers on the dangers of swill feeding. We also continue to call for reforms in the disease management and information dissemination. During the peak of COVID-19 and the implementation of lockdowns and quarantine measures, checkpoints became the worst bottleneck that our operations have encountered. We called for improvements on the conduct of checkpoints to help facilitate the movement of food and essential commodities. The COVID-19 pandemic also emphasized further the need to tackle local food security from a holistic point of view rather than focusing in an individual level of the chain. There was and still is an oversupply of agricultural commodity due to this pandemic. Unfortunately, this caused lower income margins throughout the agricultural production chain. Moreover, the excess of importation further burdened local industries as these finished products do not go through the production chain, nor do they generate a significant amount of livelihood and income generation for our Filipino farmers and manufacturers. Such scenarios have been happening before the COVID-19 pandemic happened. It is all the more necessary to holistically recalibrate trade policies, especially the importation of finished products. Ensure that local prices do not go down to unprofitable and unsustainable levels, and to remove the threat of the foundation of local food security. On this note, we would like again to convey PAFMI's full support to the DA and its policies that promote our country's welfare in this time of pandemic, and to its policies and actions that cater to the needs and sentiments of the feed milling industry and the host of affiliate and allied stakeholders of the poultry, livestock, and aqua sectors. We would like to express PAFMI's willingness to continue collaborating on matters concerning the promotion of food security through holistic food self-reliance plan, adopting a Filipino first trade policy direction in across the agricultural production, and strengthening the farming, feeds, poultry, livestock, and aqua industries, as these provide significant support to our people who work to produce food that is accessible to all. Ibalik natin ang aspeto ng lokal sa usapin ng food security. Maraming salamat po.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nikki Garcia. Moving on to our last but not least speaker, of course, we have Mr. Rex Agarado, who's a spokesperson for the Philippine Association of Meat Processors, Inc. Mr. Agarado. Rex Agarado.
Sorry, I thought Martin was going to be the next.
Yeah, sorry about that. There was a
my
change in the program a bit.
Is Martin here? It's okay, but I'm not prepared. So you can possibly handle a few questions while I'm setting up because I just.
Sure. I also now have to set up the question, so maybe we can both have a few seconds.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, but Martin was supposed to be next,
yeah,
so that's
I
why
understand.
I'm ill prepared.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Here now I have my screen and here. Okay. Small zoom. So.
Well,
Sorry.
it's all right. Well,
Okay.
so in the meantime, maybe I could just. So we have had some questions come in, and we're trying to put them together for our open forum in a bit. If we know that Yusik Ariel has been here since he gave our keynote address, if we're wondering if he's still here. Maybe I could ask him some questions while we wait for Mr. Agrado to set up. Okay. Yusek Ariel, perhaps you're still there? No? Okay, that's all right. We have gone over time a bit, so it's understandable. But okay, I see here now that the screen is up. The screen sharing is up for Mr. Agarado. So perhaps we could pass it back on to him now.
Okay. Yeah, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Stratbase ADR, Sits and Watch, for inviting us over. Apparently, everybody has expressed their ideas. Apparently, I would say 80–90% of thoughts were anti-imports. I would like to open by saying that this is very disruptive. 90–95% of our meat materials are imported. Not because we would love to, but because we have to. Let me continue with my presentation. Here, the subject we're supposed to discuss today is the food supply chain. For us in the meat processing industry, we look at this as really conventions and rationalized interventions among all our stakeholders, including government regulators, with the end in mind to achieve sustainable food security and safety for the Philippine nation. I express this to be our stakeholders, our raw material suppliers, local and international packaging materials, blah, blah, blah. So just read through it. Most importantly, our consumers, but not to mention, but not to forget them, our employees and the staff who actually do the conversion in spite of the difficulties when everybody was staying inside. This pandemic has challenged and continued to impinge on our food processing systems. Our old business models all of a sudden found themselves not working as good as we want them to do. The scope and scale of dislocations in our own operations and among our stakeholders has forced our industry to redefine the concepts of interdependence, cooperation, and coexistence in the likes that we have never seen before. The past 6 months has taught us that we are Philippines Incorporated, not individual industries. With our most experienced pundits, we have realized that not one of them could foresee something of this nature, and more so to control the changes that come with it. We say we can only adapt. Here is a statement that thinks is of real value for us today. Charles Darwin said, "It is not the strongest nor the most intelligent person, industry, or system that survives. It is that which can adapt to the change." That was 161 years ago, still very real, and I think it's a good guide for us to go into this discussion. As individual businesses or as industries, we will only continue to exist because we deserve to exist. We will only continue to exist for as long as we continuously provide relevant value to our consumers' changing needs. Under the current exigencies, the following consumer needs are highlighted and are redefined: convenience and effectivity, availability, affordability, and supply sustainability. These are the customer needs, and they are always right. We provide for them, so we will adapt. There are three ways to adapt, actually. And this, again, is from Charles Darwin. I don't know why he came to my mind as I was writing this paper. In his concepts of adaptation, he says there are three types of adaptation. One is behavioral. It's a response for survival to reproduce or to continue our businesses. It is physiological, our business processes. It is structural. Our features are shaped by regulations that either are regulators or are enablers. Consumer expectations demand, in very clear terms, as I mentioned, these issues, but I'd like to take them up one by one. Convenience and effectivity. During the height of the pandemic, I must say, yes, we benefited. We had shelf stability, so people were buying our canned products left and right. It was very easy to distribute. There was no need for refrigerated trucks. And we were providing the cheapest meat, the cheapest protein source on a per kilogram or on a per gram basis. Availability is something that a consumer will always want you to do. And availability means somebody replaces you. We are meat, but we are going to be replaced by other segments if we are not here, if we are not able to sustain that demand. Availability is being challenged by the SPS, or the phytosanitary status of our supplier countries. Of course, talks has been made earlier that ASF has resurrected, and it has destroyed actually over 100 million pigs in China. And they now are competing with the world and with us. Actually, on this issue, we need government, we beg government to institutionalize the accreditations of the foreign meat establishments. This is a disruptor to everybody who has spoken and who believes that imports are not the way to go. Allow me some time to tell you why we have to look at it from the other perspective. Affordability. Our affordability was challenged and is continuing to be challenged. For the information of everybody, our MDM is actually due to increase its duty from 5 to 40% at the stroke of midnight on December 31. That is going to raise prices to levels of at least 15, 18%. And that is if we are allowed to increase. The loss of our supply basis actually is something that has to be addressed. And we also beg the Philippine government, DA in particular, to rationalize and to once and for all address the Brazil issue. The Philippines is the only country in the world to have banned chicken imports because of COVID scare. The closest that happened is China. China did not ban, China delisted. Delisting is the correct way, but not banning. China has also delisted a few facilities in the US. That is the way, but you don't ban a country because this is a situation where you cannot say that you will always be able to produce everything here. We will need to interdepend. Supply sustainability. This is challenged actually, and I ask this, and this is where I think I hold hands with Bong and the livestock producers. Government, we need meat, but we need it in the format that it is supposed to come. When we say we need 80,000 tons of beef fat, who can give us that? Government, the only way you can do, and Yusek Ariel earlier said that they just inaugurated a Batangas facility. It was, but I heard him mention it was a slaughterhouse. Yusek Ariel, that will not address our issue. And I say, please use our government's resources, government money properly. To my knowledge, this is already the third project that was funded by people's money, sometimes borrowed money, but actually we're not done in a manner where it is supposed to be sustainable. It should be run by businesses. I was very happy when I saw Martin Gomez speaking before me, but unfortunately Martin is not here. Martin, as far as I know, has run his own private enterprise on cat floors. I think it was a system with Loida Luis where they attempted to do this. But actually it's because when I put up a slaughterhouse and farmers don't commit to me for supply, I will always have my overhead. Mrs. Soledad Agbayani also tried it with the FDI facility before. Mrs. Agbayani died unhappy because the dream that she said was never realized, because here again, we as Filipinos, we are never disciplined. You start a project and yet you, as soon as the project is running, you don't supply it with pigs. When pig prices are high, they sell to the highest bidder. These investments, and I say that the Batangas investment will fail unless this is handled by a business person, not by local governments. Sorry, with all due respects, local governments, you manage government systems, but I think you have no right to manage business enterprises. Here again are relevant industry challenges amidst the pandemic. And here is something that we actually, who are so anti-imports, should realize that we are not living in a vacuum. We interact. The zero duty entry of finished goods from the ASEAN countries has already happened. You go to the supermarkets, you see many brands of tuna coming in. You have, I cannot mention names, but I saw at least 4 that were made in Thailand coming in. Why is it coming in? Because ASEAN imports now come in at zero duty. But if you notice, look closely, those cans are 307 cans, the flat cans. The moment you see 202 cans are sardinas cans. As soon as that bridge is broken, sardine industry will suffer, meat industry will suffer, tuna industry will suffer. So here is a case where we just have to watch and we just have to be efficient. Look again, MDM was star of the show. They were taken out of the shelves during the ASF times. Why are they back? The Chinese actually formulated luncheon meat from chicken. Look closely what you have in the shelves. They look like regular pork luncheon meat. Look closely, they are luncheon meat. They are actually effective and efficient because they are using MDM. They are coming in at a duty rate of 3%. This literally came in at the middle of the night when we were actually having all of this pandemic. And now you see maling in the shelves. Should I cry? Should I lament? I say, I have to be careful. I just have to be more efficient. And I'm not here to scare you. The Philippines actually is a very good country as far as 202 cans is concerned. Nobody could beat the Philippines in the 202 cans. We have the thinnest cans. We have the best manufacturing facilities. And I think the fear of Thailand going in on 202 tuna, on 202 meatloaf is remote because we are using now 0.13 millimeters, very thin, but we are able to make it work. But watch China. Watch China. It's very scary. So here, our competition, guys, is not us. Competition is external. We need to rationalize our businesses, and we have to use our Philippines Cup, the Philippines Incorporated Cup. On behalf of the meat processing industry, I challenge, or sorry, I beg government regulators to morph into enablers. So how is the meat processing industry managing the supply chain amidst this pandemic? I must say with very much difficulty. But we are managing. We are thankful and we are hopeful that government's continued support and understanding will always be there. I'm here to say thank you to government. You've been good to us, but you also have been bad to us. So I say, let's keep on interacting. Just to say a bit about the industry, the Philippine meat processing industry is not a very big industry. It's not also a very small industry. Our annual revenue is about 300 billion, and we also provide employment to 150 persons directly. If you count actually our suppliers, the cans, the labels, and everything, that will more than multiply maybe 3 times of that. The Philippine industry's output last year was 900,000 metric tons or 9 million kilos. That is divided into 30% of that goes to food service. So you have your you have the fried chicken, you have the nuggets, you have this and that, and 70% actually are traditional branded and also backyard producers. And here is what happened to us. Yes, we are lucky. That's why I say we have to be thankful because we were patronized. We actually did produce a record of 260 million cans for the 90-day period, and we have never done that in our history. This did happen because government was listening. When IATF was actually closing down the roads that carries our tin cans, we actually begged and they listened. So our facilities were able to continue, but of course our costs were high. What we said, this is not the time to make money. This is actually the time for us to just exist. And here is again, I'm not very religious, but God looks through our intentions. The surge in imports that many people are questioning, by a stroke of luck, that is what allowed us to produce as much when it was not expected to be. And I say, Lord, thank you for getting us whatever that is to guide us to bring in that many times are also criticized by others. Yes, the meat processing industry is 95% dependent on meat imports, not because we want to, but because we have to. This is because of the general inability of producers to integrate forward to support our cut meat needs. Producers still would like to sell to us carcasses with bones. We don't operate that way. Government, that project that you have in Batangas, please look at it again. Does it have a cut floor? If it does not have a cut floor, I would say, Yusek Ariel, that's all blah blah. That's not going to assist us. Aawayin pa rin ako ni Bong, aawayin pa rin ako ng livestock producers. But what you portray to be the solution is not the solution. And if you let it run by government, it will never happen. I tell you, PAMPI has fostered direct cooperation with progressive poultry and livestock producers, and we have done it. We have started it. However, the lockdowns in Mindanao that has discontinued the flow of pork to Manila has stopped our access to pork. You know, guys, pork that is chilled, pork that is fresh is the best material. Frozen materials does not give us as much emulsification properties. You cannot make as good a ham with imported frozen pork. The best hams are produced from chilled pork. And we would like to have chilled pork if you have it. I must say though that in the chicken sector, those in the restaurant operations, we have been able to do that. I mean, McDonald's, the Jollibees, they have actually patronized local if it is possible. You see, guys, a little of technology. When you freeze chicken, the blood inside of the inside that marrow migrates actually to the side of the bones. And those of you who are very critical, when you eat actually your chicken, you will say, why is there black spots on the bones? That is because possibly frozen chicken has been used. But by the old standards of McDonald's that I used to run, I was general manager of the McDonald's facility. Before, I would never be allowed to use frozen chicken because McDonald's was so strict. You should not have that black stripe on the bones. So guys, we don't use imported chicken because we have to. We like it if you make it available to us. Sorry. And I say this again with all clarity. 800 million kilos of meat are imported every year. Yes, of which 50 to 60% goes to meat processors. But everybody is being affected. And I say, yes, I commiserate with Bong. Actually, we were together in many issues, in many discussions. And yes, there was a time when it dropped to 50 or maybe 47 or lower. But it was something that actually was not planned. Actually, it came from a situation where ASF was attacking the country. When ASF was attacking the country, the natural tendency of planners is to say people will now be buying more chicken because of the fear that is instilled. So they also grew more. If you look at the growth of the chicken production in 2018, 2019, and into 2020, those were more than what is necessary. But I don't blame them because actually they were forecasting an increased demand. So guys, we make mistakes. When it goes close to the Lenten season, I don't produce meat products because I know that there's going to be less preference for that. This is what I mean by self-regulate. This, I don't say, please don't stop producing, but I say self-regulate. Here also is the fact that swine fever affected the country and consumer confidence has been eroded. We worked hard with the hog producers to actually put in our advertisements that pork is safe. Unfortunately, when COVID came in, rules of government that are possibly rightly placed discontinued the flow of pork from Mindanao to here. Today, Mindanao is languishing for very low prices. Luzon doesn't have supply. Here, and this is something that I would like. We are not the baby of anybody.
We're running out of time, lang po.
Okay, just 3 more slides.
Saying, yeah.
Yeah, but here I was saying that government, when you say that there is a disconnect between local government and actually national government, this is also what's happening to us. As of today, as we speak, there are 81 provinces in the Philippines, 40/52, we cannot still enter. Why? Because of the ban that was imposed by the local governments. And when we asked actually why, we went to Malacanang and they said, sorry, the local government code gives the local governments the autonomy to decide and the autonomy to control. And so here we are. So what did happen? Industry adopted. You now see non-pork based hot dogs in Mindanao coming from Luzon. Why? Because that is the only way for us to adjust. And when you are seeing chicken imports coming in, we had to produce chicken tocino because our pork tocino cannot anymore go to the vicinity Mindanao areas, which actually is a very big market. That's actually 48% of the population. Anyway, I'll just leave my presentation, but I say that here we are subjected to all the increases in prices, but we again have the Price Act. And guys, listen to this. The Price Act actually prevents us from raising our prices because we are in a state of calamity. That was supposed to have expired March 16. We were happy, praying, and hopeful. But actually, 2 days before, on March 14, President Duterte again issued Proclamation 1081 that actually would not allow us to raise prices amidst all of these costs in the next 12 months. So we are still praying, hopeful for government support, and we are now praying to Saint William of DA, Saint Ramon of DTI, Saint Eduardo of the DILG, and Saint Francisco of DOH. And here, government has been very active. They brokered us to cooperate. We used not to, I don't like San Miguel to know what is inside my facility. I don't like to CDO to know what is, but government forced us to, and this is the result. On your screen, you will see actually that we actually every week we declare, and look at these numbers. The inventory today, as we speak, are very low. So when you think there's no problem, yes, the industry still has a problem. The inventory levels of the finished products are very low. The raw materials are very low. I'll skip the technical measures, the NTM measures. It requires some discussion, but here, well, anyway, let me end by saying that the Philippine meat processing industry will continue to grow, and we work our commitment to provide for the needs of the country, working with stakeholders and government regulators who we hope will morph to enablers. We know we can solve this together. We know this is not a no import issue. This is working together. There are better solutions than that. Thank you. May the force be with you.
Thank you, Mr. X. Thank you very much. So now I'll get straight into our Q&A. We're already more than a bit over time from our original program. So if you please indulge me na lang, and I'll go straight to the questions. The first one was for Yusek Ariel Sana, but maybe I can just throw it to the industry experts since we have a room full of them now. The first one here is actually a two-part question related to two products, corn and chicken. The first one, so the two-part question is, corn for the last 20 years has never been competitive. How can corn now be an exportable product? At the same time, it says here, the National Meat Inspection Service, or NMIS, latest figures states that there are more imported chickens in storage than locally produced chicken. If the DA is saying that it is supporting the local chicken producers, what should be the ratio if imported and local chicken produced and in storage? Perhaps, hopefully, our industry experts here can address these questions in the absence of Yusek Ariel.
I can share.
Oh, is he here?
You ask Attorney Bong Insong, but I can share some ideas.
Sure, maybe both of you could share some ideas. Yeah.
Bobby, you go ahead.
Okay, this is my based on my experience as an agripreneur, and based on my experience as viewing all those situation in the industry. We have a private sector partner. Kasi PPP kasi, private sector and government partnership dapat. Government, specifically, which agency of government would be in constant consultation with the major stakeholders. In the case of UBRA, dapat ang gobyerno magkukonsulta sa kanila regarding their program and how to really calibrate their position as far as allowing the importation. Kailangan kasi nakabalance yan. Give and take. Give and take ang ano niyan. And the role of the United Broilers Association is to ilatag yung kanilang programa sa gobyerno, and give also an allowance because may peste, may ang daming issues nangyayari, logistics concern, and cold storage facility. Parallel ang kanilang discussion. Ako, yan lang ang nakikita ko which can be immediate. There is a stimulus fund that was approved under Bayanihan 2. All those infrastructure projects pwede mong gawin. It can be in place within 12 months to 18 months or 2 years. I think that's a suggestion from a private sector who is also an agripreneur. Thank you. Tony Bong.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Amores.
Thank you, Bobby. Sir, regarding corn, I think we really need to earmark the tariffs for feed wheat, the tariff revenues generated from importation of feed wheat and corn itself, earmark it to help the industry, the corn industry. The same way with the broiler industry. We need to earmark the revenues from importations to help the industry either through facilities or through, like in the United States, some form of direct payments to the sector. But regarding the question on, I'm not sure what the question was about the inventory. Just to give perspective, last year the inventory, the same period, was only 29 million kilos. As of September 21, it's at 70 million kilos. And the reason for this is that chicken abroad is really cheap because they also have demand problems in the United States, in Europe, in other jurisdictions. So it's very easy to import. And, for example, our main problem is chicken leg quarters. We made a computation, I think, last month or in July. It can come in if you have a MAB, a minimum access volume. It can come in, all expenses in already at 62 pesos, chicken leg quarters. if you have to pay, if you do not have the minimum access volume or the quota, it can come in at 68 pesos. How can the local people compete with that when we are producing live whole chicken at around 65? Dati-dati, nagkakaiwasan pa yung imports and local production because you had HRI. Importers would prefer to sell to the HRI dahil masigurado bayad and volume, mabilis ang turnaround, okay lang yon. And the impact would be indirect pagka nambabarat yung mga fast food, the integrators here will go live, will sell to the live market, to the household market, and the impact will at least be indirect. Right now, we are on collision, direct collision course with the imports. That is the problem. So, and you need government intervention here.
Sige po. Can I say something, Paco? This is Rex. Actually, yes. I think I volunteer a solution that actually is already within the rules. You know, when you import chicken, there is what is called the safeguard duty. The safeguard duty is if chicken prices go in at a very low price, actually an automatic mechanism comes in. But you know what? And this is, I hope that Ariel is listening or somebody from DA is listening. The trigger price mechanism, meaning when you hit that price that is so low, the value of the duties kicks a lot. And that actually protects Bong. But that protection is not there anymore because when was the trigger value last discussed? The trigger value that we have today is still a 15-year-old trigger value. It's no longer relevant. I suggest that we work together and we say, government, gawin nyo naman trabaho nyo, review the trigger value so that si Bong is not also hit. I agree with him. When prices of chicken are so low, we, the importers, should be taxed because they possibly will be making too much money. But why is the trigger value not talked about? This is possibly the first open discussion why I say this, kasi magagalit yung iba. But I volunteer the solution. There is a mechanism for you to penalize the importers for possibly making too much money. Sorry, thank you.
Rex, the problem is, even if you apply now the SSG, it will still come in at 68.
Bong, I would like to propose that the trigger mechanism is changed so that that trigger mechanism kicks in. So let's look at the regulations, and thank you, Paco, for getting us here. Mahirap kami ni Bong magkita kung minsan na hindi kami, nagsasmile kami. But you know, when we approach DA together and we tell them, pre, can you look at the trigger mechanism? Can you do something so that prices, duties are changed when it is too low?
That is why we need a plan. We need them to implement ACMA. Ang problema nga, new thinking tayo ng new thinking. In thinking lang nila yun.
Yeah.
Yun ang problema.
Okay, I actually have, you mentioned earlier government interventions, and this is what we're discussing now. And I think it leads us nicely to our next question here, which is, and maybe I can ask naman this time Ms. Nikki Garcia, and then later on also Dr. Briones, first as an industry perspective, and then maybe from a more academic, economic background. As an industry, or for Dr. Briones as PIDS, what particular government interventions would you like to see in the agriculture sector to further boost food productivity? Maybe we could have Ms. Nikki Garcia first.
Well, first, definitely they need to, I mean, USEC Ariel already mentioned a lot of programs. I'm just hoping that he can
Can you, we can't hear you very well, boss, so maybe you could,
yeah, USEC Ariel Kayanan already mentioned a lot of programs. I think what we're looking for is consistent implementation and a more data-driven DA, because I think without data, the private sector cannot make moves, and data that is timely. So we would like them to support the agriculture and make it a more data-driven department, and also to support the agribusiness and processes into higher value products. And then third is really the DA, together with the private sector, to have a collaboration on calibrated importation And when the demand seems low, I think there should be an opportunity to not ask the local industry to lessen their production because you will take out livelihood, but lessen the importation of finished products so that we don't steal away the livelihood from our local industries that rely heavily on the livestock and chicken business.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks for that. Thank you, thank you. Dr. Briones, might we hear some of your insights as well?
Yeah, actually, I would second the point of Nikki, but I think that we have to look beyond production. Right now, the highest priority program of the department is identified as the clustering. Now, I think this clustering is an opportunity to look at the organizational and institutional side of agricultural development, especially since I recommended strongly for the department to focus its programs on inclusiveness towards small farmers and fisher folk. As I said, the medium and large agribusiness, they can more or less, aside from a few public goods and better regulation, manage for themselves, and R&D, by the way. So, as I was saying, to give an example, a few years ago, we did an evaluation of the post-harvest processing facilities, including the rice processing centers. So DA got some grants from Korea, and it has its own funding for these rice processing centers. So they were successful in introducing modern technology in rice processing. But what happened after the project? It was given to farmer organizations to manage. We could not find, I'm sorry to say, maybe there are exceptions, but the ones we visited, we could not find one that was sustainably and properly managed. Maybe it was the selection of farmer organizations that DA had. So that means it's technology, as it were, of handling the organizational and institutional side of these development programs. I think that's something that needs to be done. The problem is their pressure is always to come up with 70 billion budget, spend it all. Next year, another 70 billion budget, spend it all, rather than thinking, okay, we already did this in the past. What can we do to sustain the benefits from this modernization of the processing side na hindi palaging pumapalpak? So I think there's already new thinking. Within the new thinking, introduce more reminders that this is a serious side, a serious gap in implementation across many similar government programs.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that, Paul. Unfortunately, we are really over time, so we're down to our last question. We have actually several, but I'm just going to go straight to this one. And maybe I can just ask everybody. It's a question from the audience. It says here, the food and beverage industry, particularly the hospitality sector, suffered terribly during the pandemic. And the restaurant group created a consortium called Resto PH and collaborated with the malls and the DA. Produce was sold by farmers directly to the restaurant operators on select days and at competitive prices, with augmented supply guaranteed while the program is ongoing. How can we ensure that that programs such as this are sustained and institutionalized and not palliative and short-term only? So these are, I think here they're really talking about the innovations that have come up during the pandemic. And the question really here from our participant is, how do you think that these can be institutionalized post-pandemic? Anybody? This would have been a really good question, I imagine, for you, Sek. But I mean, if does anybody have, if not this question, perhaps it's a good time to close then. If people look like they're tired, I see people nodding their heads when I said that. So perhaps, yeah. So maybe I just take this opportunity to thank everybody for attending. It was a very good discussion. To be honest, personally, the agri sector is one that I am not that deeply and intimately familiar with. So hearing the different perspectives and the competing perspectives, the opposing perspective, is really interesting for me. So really, thank you, everybody. Disrupting the food cycle and supply chains was one of the many aggravating problems that this pandemic has brought to our society. with constrained mobility, supply chains were really derailed significantly, if not stopped. Hence, the new normal poses serious challenges and opportunities to the food cycle and supply chain. That's why we're really happy that this event, Managing Food Supply Chains Amidst the Pandemic, a multi-stakeholder perspective, has brought together different sectors with different viewpoints together to discuss how we can do better and enhance a food secure environment in the new normal. The end goal of this discussion, which I think we only scratch the surface of, is to draw up a post-pandemic plan for the agriculture sector that strikes a sustainable balance between locally sourced and imported raw materials and products. One thing that stood out to me, and that was clear after our discussions, that we all need to work together. It was mentioned that the industry is small, but it affects so many of us, and it will take government, private sector, academe, and civil society to work together to achieve a more food secure Philippines. So with that, I would like to thank all of our speakers, Yusek Ariel, Kong Kabatbat, and all of our industry and academe experts for sharing their time with us. On behalf of Professor Dean Manhit and the Stratbase ADRI Institute, I'd like to thank you and officially close today's event, today's session. Thank you so much, and take care, and we'll be seeing you around.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat. Maraming
Thank you.
salamat.